We're going to be going over several different topics with them today to help us get a better understanding of what they're looking at when they're seeing patients, and how we can help facilitate communication between ourselves and them, and what other things we can do to help get injured workers back to work faster. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly introduce our panelists. First, Dr. William Brooks with Ortho Georgia, down on the far end there. Dr. Brooks earned his undergraduate degree in biology from the University of Georgia. He also got his doctorate of medicine from the Medical College of Georgia and completed an orthopedic residency at Atlanta Medical Center. He accepted a fellowship appointment for spine from the New England Baptist Hospital in Boston. He's board certified by the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery and a member of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, amongst many other prestigious groups. Also, we have Dr. David Heinz with Georgia Bone and Joint. Dr. Heinz completed his medical degree also at the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. After med school, he completed his orthopedic surgery residency at the Campbell Clinic and the University of Tennessee in Memphis, Tennessee. He's undergone additional training after residency in the form of foot and ankle surgery fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. He specializes in many surgical, non-surgical treatments of foot, ankle, and lower extremity. He also is a member of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, American Orthopedic Foot and Ankle Society, and again, numerous prestigious organizations. Next, we have Dr. Scott Pennington with Peachtree Orthopedic Clinic. Dr. Pennington joined Peachtree Orthopedics in 2008 and is also board certified in orthopedic surgery, has a certificate of added qualifications in sports medicine. He brings extensive national and international training in shoulder surgery and sports medicine, and has served as team doctor for several professional teams focusing on shoulder and knee issues. And last but not least, Dr. Paul Mefford with the Physicians. Dr. Mefford is a pain management specialist in Marietta, has been practicing for 16 years. He's a graduate of Kansas University of Medicine and Biosciences College of Osteopathic Medicine in 2002, easy for me to say. Specializes in pain medicine, physical medicine, and rehabilitation pain medicine, amongst many other things. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. All right, so here are the list of the topics we're going to be going over today. And we also want this to be a little free form. We have microphones out in the aisles, so if something comes up and you've got a question, please feel free to go up to the mic, and I'm sure that one or more of our experts can help answer that for you. All right, so we are starting off our day with one of our favorite topics as employers, insurers, and defense attorneys: fraud, symptom, magnification, and malingering. All right, so what we're trying to look at right now are what some of these doctors look at initially to identify something early in the claim. Sorry about that. What I'd like to do is start off with Dr. Pennington. Can you give us some ideas or some techniques that you utilize when you are first seeing a patient, trying to assess them, assessing not only their credibility, the extent of their injury, and what's going on with that?
Sure. I think one of the more important things to look at when you see a patient for the first time is to consider the mechanism of injury. So if they had a ground level fall, they fell on an outstretched hand and they can't lift their arm, it's very possible that they could have a rotator cuff tear or just a bruise of their shoulder. But when they have sort of low interval, what we call low energy injuries, but they act like they've been in a head-on car crash on 285, that's when you first start to worry. You say, this is not really consistent with the type of energy that creates this injury. So if they have a low mechanism of injury and they sort of present like it's worse than that, that's concerning. And then your first physical examination is critical. If it's very acute after the injury, they can have other things going on if it's after a day or two. But usually after about a week, some of the less significant problems should start to abate. And that's when you can really assess how, it's kind of hard to explain, but you get through their history, the way they describe their injury, And through your assessment, you get a gestalt. You start to feel, is this person really being thorough? Are you getting the sense in the examination that you're creating a teamwork to work with this patient, or is it already starting a little bit adversarial? You can tell that at the first visit. So examination, mechanism of injury, and then that sort of feel. Are they wanting to get better? You can tell that pretty early in the visit.
Dr. Brooks, is it similar things that you look at from a spine standpoint?
Absolutely. The certainly for a spine, it seems like there's could be a higher incidence of malingering. I usually start with before I get to the mechanism, how long have they been at their current employment. I try to get a feel of how do they like their job, is the job they enjoy. If someone's been at work for less than 6 months, I kind of sharpens me a little bit. Think this might be, it could be a case of malingering. And then you go through your treatment. What treatment have they had currently? Did they have a delayed, did they go, delayed recognition of the injury? Did they tell their supervisor immediately? Did they go to the ER 3 days later and get, big, pain medication? Did they say, oh, that didn't even touch it? So that's kind of how I start off looking at. Tell me the story of how it began. Tell me how you work. Is this a job you like? It doesn't say you can't be injured your second day at work, but it's certainly less likely. And then you just go from there. Is the mechanism real? Was it a witnessed injury? Does this match up with the symptoms that we're seeing? Is the patient responding to treatment? Or is this something where, once again, you just keep hitting that same wall and you start thinking, does the patient want to get better? Is this real? But a lot of what Dr. Benjamin said, I agree with that completely.
Dr. Heinz, how do you differentiate, if at all, between symptom magnification and outright malingering? What do you have a particular test or group of tests?
Well, it kind of depends on what injury you're starting with. I like going by serial examinations. Are they consistent? Number one, with the injury that was diagnosed, and then do they have the same consistent symptoms, or is it changing? The other thing that sometimes you can rely on is doing a kind of false provocative tests. So are they having pain with things that really, given the injury they had, shouldn't be painful? And are they having pain in different areas? Did they present with an ankle sprain, but now they're having numbness on their whole foot? This tends to be something that as their clinical scenario is evolving, would point to a less organic cause. And when you get into kind of the neuro type things, it's a little bit harder to prove. So just making sure that you have objective tests that back up the symptoms they're having.
And to follow up on that, Doctor, do you, when you're you're writing out your report, what is the kind of wording you typically use if you're starting to have an idea that this person is not exactly telling you the whole story or embellishing their symptoms?
And this is kind of a delicate situation between patient and physician. With some early wording I use is pain out of proportion with mechanism, or pain out of proportion with injury, and inconsistent exam, so pain not consistent with exam. The other thing, I sometimes will, if you order a test that's normal, their symptoms change. If you have another normal test, a lot of times you can point to this is a non-organic type of pain injury.
Also, to Harry's point, a lot of times I'll get a phone call from a doctor who will say, just between me and you, I'm not going to put this in my notes, but this person is full of it. Which I'm glad to know, but that doesn't help me at all. So I'd like to know, are there certain things that the folks here, when they're looking at the medical records, can they pick up on, rather than a blunt, this person's full of it, or they're malingering, that they can say, this doctor really is questioning this, and maybe I should ask more specific questions?
If I use the word interesting about the patient and they're not a rock and roll musician,
That's interesting.
that is my key word to say that I'm looking at them to come back to check them again. I say, especially if I use it twice, I'm telling myself to check them again. I'm not sure I'm buying it. It's a nice word. It's not hard. Just most of my patients are not that interesting.
Dr. Meffrey, are there any key words that you use other than malingering, whatever?
I tend to be a little bit more direct. So people who know me know I'm kind of direct in some of my notes. I'll kind of tell you what I'm thinking. It's pretty clear most of the time. I will, with malingering, I do tend to very rarely use that term because there are 4 stages of sort of symptom magnification, with malingering being at the top, right? The first 3 really is sort of a subconscious thing. A lot of the time the patient doesn't really understand they're doing it, or they're not doing it on purpose. By the time you get to malingering, it's a secondary gain issue. It kind of becomes a legal issue, right? So they're faking symptoms, or they're exaggerating symptoms because they want to get something out of it personally, whether it's money, they want to get a big settlement for themselves and their attorney, or they just want attention from a loved one that doesn't give them any attention anymore. So there's all kinds of different psychological reasons why somebody could be malingering something to get secondary gain. So it's hard for me to prove, right? So when you say somebody's malingering, you got to kind of prove that there's a secondary gain they're looking for. And I don't always have that information. Sometimes surveillance videos help, and sometimes witness, testimonies help about, so-and-so comes in and says, well, they told me they just wanted a big account. You rarely get that. So I tend to use symptom magnification. I use words like self-limited, self-guarding. You'll see that in my exam a lot. When somebody's self-limiting, when I'm trying to do an extremity exam or a spine exam, for example, when you have them standing upright and they got a little back injury, and you want to see how well their back bends, they're bending their entire body rather than the spine itself. They're rigid. They won't let you do it. Go back to how do you identify some of these people who are kind of malingering or symptom magnifying. You can press directly on their head, their spine, and they complain of low back pain. I'm not strong enough to put enough force through somebody's spine to create low back pain by pressing on the neck. I'm just going to head pain first, right? You think that happened. So there's some keywords. I will tell you in my notes, I tend to be direct. Their complaints do not match the objective data. I do not have an objective reason for their complaints. I'll just tell you that. I don't tell people, say they're malingering unless I absolutely prove it. That's rare.
You listed the pressing down on the head. Dr. Pennington, are there any other just objective tests you use in the office when you have a suspicion that something else is going on, or do you utilize the same test regardless of the patient?
Yeah, I've never mentioned this ever before, but I sort of made up my own test. It's totally unvalidated. But there's
Everybody hit record.
Yeah. But there's an area of your scapula where there's really just some attachment of muscles. There's not a lot of tendons there. There's really nothing there. It's right along. It's not your back. It's not the muscles that attach the scapula, but right along the spine. And no one has ever hurt there, ever, with just a conventional injury. Unless they have fallen off of a building and broken their scapula, they will not hurt there, unless they're full of crap. And so you can hurt the front of your shoulder, you can hurt the side, you can hurt the back, but if you hurt along that spine, normal people don't hurt there. So I don't want to call it the Pennington sign, but that's what I use. I've never mentioned that before, but that is my own personal thing.
We'll get you to one of our intellectual property attorneys if we can trademark for that pretty quickly. Dr. Heinz, do you utilize FCEs to help you in your practice?
I do, and in my practice, we do our FCs through a third party, so I get the report back, and it will document self-limiting behavior. And so if I've gotten someone to the point where I think that their residual symptoms are not due to the injury or they're at their maximum, I get an FCE. And then we discuss, I have them come back and we go over it. And so really from this FCE, we can't draw a lot of conclusions because you're self-limited greater than 10% of your tasks they ask you to do. And so that just, for me, helps me just point to them that you have to be willing to participate in order to do that.
Okay. Dr. Brooks, any other thoughts on FCEs and the use of FCEs?
I do the same. I use a third party I've used to keep Blankenship since I started, and that's good. I use the same person every time. I don't vary it, and it's really, really good to get the same kind of consistent reporting.
Well, we're very fortunate today to be joined by Peggy Friedman, who is an expert in this area and has conducted thousands of FCEs, tens of thousands.
Lots.
So I would kind of like to maybe get your thoughts
Let me
on
step up here. Tap the mic.
how you go about your FCEs and what information you get from the doctors and that you can help provide to the doctors.
And in each one of our FCEs last 4 hours from the time the patient comes into the office until they leave. And everybody that comes in goes through a screening. We call it a validity screen. Some of it is objective testing that we use that's been researched by other people. And some of it is just observational. So We do a lot of coefficient of variance. We do lots of tests. We test between probably 20 and 35 different things to look at whether somebody's giving their effort. Because I don't want to do one test and say somebody's not giving their best effort, and I haven't given them a big enough sample to really look at it. So we do quite a few tests to look at what's really going on with somebody. We also take pictures and put them in our report. Some of our favorite things that are not objective, but you have somebody with a cervical injury and you do range of motion testing, and they move their head like this, and they move their head like this, and they move their eyes. You know, but they don't really move their head. And then you have them later on during testing, and they're looking down doing a hand test, and they've got their head like this, or they're talking to you and they turn their head like that, and we just take pictures. And so a lot of times that helps. We had somebody in last week for a shoulder problem, and again, it's range of motion was like this. Okay, like that. And he had already been given an impairment rating by his physician. Then when we had him a few hours later doing a balance test, he was losing his balance, and his arms were all over the place. So those are the subjective things that you can look at and see, and then with the pictures, it really helps, I think, the physicians, because it's not just my words, but when you see it, and then there's no pain posturing. Or, you know, we make comments, we look at heart rate throughout the testing. Is their heart rate responding appropriately? So there's lots of different ways that we look at good effort, so that when I'm giving information to the physician, they know what to do with it. If somebody really doesn't give a good effort with their test, my recommendation is return to work, and I'll say that we really can't determine objective work parameters because they didn't give their best effort, so I don't really know what they can do. If somebody gives their best effort during testing, then I say these are the work parameters that they can work within, and this is how you can move your case forward. And sometimes, you know, people do have real injuries and they do have real limitations. The ones that are symptom exaggerating are more fun to talk about. And those are the ones that, for me, it's always, I have more fun with it because I'm trying to figure out ways to show that they're not giving their best effort, because they just need to be moved through the system and they need to be moved on. And I get referrals from both sides of the fence, claimant and defense attorneys, and it's the same report, it's the same evaluation. It doesn't matter who's referring to me. If you're a claimant attorney and your client bombs out, your client bombs out. And that's just the way it is. And if it's an employer attorney and they really have problems, then they really have problems. But I think that's what makes it easier for everybody. But it's doing a multitude of different validity screens so that you can really tell whether somebody's giving their best effort. If you give one or two tests, I really think that you can have a biased judgment that's not really fair for anybody.
Thank you very much, Peggy. Does anyone have a question? Yes.
I've got one employer that absolutely hates FCEs. She would love for me to deny everyone. I don't feel I can do that if it's ordered by the ATP.
Again, that probably goes back to what we talked earlier about the PMT. If you get that and the ATP has ordered a functional, did everybody hear that? Is if you got
may want to repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question is when you have a client or employer who just does not like FCEs, doesn't want to spend the money for whatever reason, doesn't think they add a lot to the claim, whatever the reason may be, you know, can you deny that? And the answer is no. If the authorized treating physician is ordering a functional capacity evaluation, that is part of their treatment, and something that's going to probably help you to get the person back to work faster, because if the doctor is ordering that, the doctor is telling you, I think there's a good chance this person should be able to do some work. I need objective data to rely on to determine what those restrictions should be. I don't know, any of the doctors have anything to comment on that in particular?
I'm with Harry. I like ordering FCEs on the patients. I have a select group of patients. One is when I truly just want to know what you're capable of doing. Usually the ones that aren't giving me much trouble and they're seeming ready to get back to work, but they just aren't sure themselves. But more importantly, I get the ones where they clearly are symptom exaggerating, and I'm ordering an FCE, and I did, go back to what Peggy was talking about when you do these validity testing. Obviously, they have to be plenty. When somebody punts the FCE, they're not doing full effort. That tells me a lot of information. Okay, it tells me that they don't want to go back to work and they don't want to get better. Now, nothing's worse to me than seeing an FCE report that says that they failed the validity testing, therefore I can't recommend anything greater than sedentary work. But where's your objective data to say it's a restrictive? I can't stand that. There's no restrictive objective data on your report other than they just didn't do it. To me, that's not enough. So then, if there's no restrictive data, then they're not restrictive, right? So I will use an FCE saying they punted the FCE, get back to work, regular duties. I don't have any data to restrict you. So that I will use that FCE as a tool often to weed out, number one, who really wants to go back to work, and two, if I know that they're, frankly BSing me, that's a way for me to document that they're doing that from a different standpoint. So that's why I like FCEs.
And I would say maybe your insurer or the employer, maybe they need to develop a relationship or express to whoever you're going to use what their concerns are with FCEs to see if you can help ease their mind of what the conflict is with the FCE, so that they have confidence maybe in the person that's going to evaluate and do the FCE. And maybe there's some evaluators that they don't trust, and maybe they need to develop a relationship with somebody they do trust. That's the only other suggestion.
That's hard when they're all over the state.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions? Yes.
I think.
Hold on, Robert's going to come around now with a microphone. Does he look like Monty Hall? Let's make a deal.
To piggyback off of what the first question, I think, and most adjusters may agree with me, it just feels like when we do the FCE and it goes back to the doctor, they just merely sign off on it, saying return to work per FCE, as if they didn't even review it. I think that's the consensus most adjusters have with the FCEs.
Dr. Brooks, do you review the FCE?
I do. I mean, I do, but I use the same guy. I get the same.
Yeah.
I have the same report, so I kind of know. And I've certainly increased people's work. I've never probably added more restrictions to the FCE, but I've certainly allowed them to do more than what the FCE said. I think if you're getting it from different places, I can see it being the reports can get hard to read. But no, I review them and look at them. But I get the same person does online, so I kind of know. And he knows he's got myself, and he can call me as well and just say, "This is what I saw." I do look.
Anybody else have a comment? All right. Anyone else have a question, comment? Okay. Now we have a short little clip of some real life cases that we've had involving these same situations we've just been discussing.
It's not a lie. You believe it.
Please, got some complaints about convicts pretending to be flying ripples.
Well, I'd love to help you, man, but I ain't seen nothing since I stepped on that landmine in your car.
You were in now?
If any of our doctors on the panel do the test with Will Ferrell and the knife in the leg. Harry forgot to introduce me. I'm Dr. McCulloch. According to my wife, who says after 25 years of workers' comp, I think I know everything about medical conditions and diagnosing everyone in the family. But I would like for the doctors to, one thing that we didn't have them do is, would each one of you tell us where your offices are, where you practice just geographically, and what if you're an orthopedic that specializes in the spine versus lower extremity, clarify that for us. Let's start with you, Dr. Mefford.
I'm in the Marietta location. We actually have 4 locations. We're Sandy Springs, Glen Ridge with Dr. Raziano, Dr. Reiser, Dr. McNeil and Dr. Simone are in that location, and then Dr. Porter and I are up in Marietta, right across the street from Kennestone Hospital. Dr. Sherdell and Dr. Chin are in our Rome location, and then we have a satellite location in Calhoun where Dr. Chin and myself go up there. I go up there for work comp, things like Shaw engineering floors, things like that. Usually what was special? Yeah. Pain medicine, did the physical medicine rehabilitation at Emory, and did a pain fellowship with the anesthesia pain fellowship at Emory as well. So I'm PM&R in pain medicine.
I do mostly shoulder and knee surgery, and I'm in East Cobb, Alpharetta, and Sandy Springs.
I do mostly foot and ankle, some knee surgery as well. Our offices are Georgia Bones, we're in Noonan, and Peachtree City.
William Brooks with Ortho Georgia out of Macon, Georgia, and Warner Robins, and I do spine surgery.
Thank you. All right, our next topic is on communication in the workers' comp industry with doctors and the other parties. I think we have a little intro clip.
Everyone gets hurt sometimes. It's okay to tell. You don't have to.
I was trying to get to my seat. I had to step over someone, and I kind of got put.
Have you been to the doctor?
No, I haven't.
Susie, call Dr. Bites. Set up an appointment for Mr. Kramer here. Tell him it's for me.
A comprehensive work
Did not reveal any vascular
mileage
Your Doppler was negative.
deep venous thrombosis, so there's no need for chronic
Coagulation and RNIBC double.
biopsy whatsoever. Positive.
Blood-based anaerobic.
Non-based on chronic infection.
Your VUN and creatinine elevation tests were
Rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis.
which could have signaled an autoimmune disease. What is that?
All right, so I'd like to start out with getting some feedback from our panel. One of the issues that comes up a lot in handling workers' compensation claims is, it's not group health insurance. So before we can move on with authorizing treatment or, procedure, we have to make sure it's causally related. And so sometimes that process can be difficult to get to the doctor, whether it's us writing them or making phone calls. So I'd like to ask maybe each doctor to tell us what's the best way to communicate with them in their offices and what works best for them as well to get the information to us.
So the best way, we actually have a work comp team with the physicians. We kind of, as a two-tier, we have the sort of the administrative part, which is, with Brianna and Courtney and Allegra to some degree does some of that, and then she folds over into the marketing part, which is Lindsay and then Lisa. So they're good people to talk to initially whenever you need something, and then when we, talk with attorneys or case managers or adjusters, as physicians, we always give out our cell phone number, personal cell phone number. Of course, you have our emails. So a lot of times people will text us, and Rodney and Harry, they know that they just text me. Very easy to get to me. Probably the best way to talk to me is text me or call me. I don't care if it's 10 o'clock at night. I'll usually respond to you unless I'm asleep or something like that. But we like to be as open to communication to people as we can. Rodney, we were talking about earlier, when we do IMEs and things like that, or see a new patient, we tend to usually call the adjuster or an attorney right away and just discuss, here's what we found, here's kind of what's going on, what we think. That's kind of what we do.
Thank you. Dr. Payne?
For me, the cell phone is the best way. If you could just call me directly, sometimes you have to prompt me to help me remember who we're talking about. But I only go to each office one day a week, and all of my mail goes to one office, so I only get access to that. The actual, hard copy of questionnaires only once a week. One of the things I tried to do for about a month is after I'd see a work comp patient, I would immediately call the adjuster. And my success of talking to a person was less than 10%. I would get caught in these horrible phone trees, and then invariably someone is either on the phone or has stepped away from their desk. And so I would leave a message. But so that just became too onerous in the clinic, getting caught in that phone tree. So the best way for me is definitely to call me. And it's so much faster and efficient. That's my preference.
So the best communications I've had is when the adjusters would come to the appointment with the patient if they're allowed to. That's clearly everybody's hearing the same message. It rarely happens, but when it does, that's the easiest cases. And then the other ones that go to smoothness are direct communication. Most of the time, I have them call my assistant, and they leave a message, and then I have an hour and a half between morning and afternoon clinic, and just talking to someone directly so that everybody's on the same page. The most frustrating ones are when you haven't talked to the adjuster, they've gone through your work comp coordinator, and people are getting different messages, and it leads to misunderstandings. So.
Yeah, just to reiterate myself, and I'm going to give it up to people even at this meeting. I'll answer text from anybody. So like more information to give other patients the better. And I've got one nurse who kind of directs on my work comp care, just to on my team.
Does everybody here on the panel have someone in their office that handles coordinating the workers' comp patients primarily? And we've already heard one, incidents of phone tag that can be frustrating, but does anybody else on the panel, just from your perspective, can you tell us what's frustrating about the workers' comp system and the amount of communication, or are there questions that are asked that you're not real sure why they have to be addressed? You think of?
I guess the most frustrating thing for me is when you do a note, for example, somebody comes in, they want work status, maybe they want PPI, they want some of these specific questions that you answer every time in your note, and then you get a follow-up questionnaire a week later asking those questions, and obviously you didn't read the note because I put them right in there for you, so it's like, see, maybe. That's kind of frustrating for us. We see that a lot, and that kind of gets a little irritating to have to answer the same questions over and over for me.
Okay. Anyone else?
I totally agree with that. It is very frustrating to spend a lot of time leaving a really detailed note and then having someone ask you to rewrite the note in a different format.
If y'all are seeing someone for the first time, whether it's an IME or a change in physician and you're taking over care, maybe it's just coming from an occupational clinic to being referred to an orthopedic, is it helpful for you to get a letter like from our office that summarizes the history of it along with the medical records, or do you read that at all?
Yes, I do. I love the letters from the attorney saying, here's the. A lot of times it does take a long time. And we have a prepaid amount for our IMEs. People say, why are IMEs so expensive? And the rate, the work comp rate is like $600 an hour medical record reviews. That's all built in. So when I do an IME, for example, it takes me at least 4 hours, if not more, on each IME, especially when you get stacks of records this big. I do go through those. A lot of times the problem is there's multiple duplicates of the same thing, or a bunch of insurance pages you don't need. You still got to weed all that out. So when we get the letters that say this is the history and these are the specific questions we want you to answer, I love that. When I get IMEs and I'm not sure exactly what you want to me to answer, and there's no question, the IME sort of flounders a little bit, and then I'll put in the MMI and PPI and all that stuff, and then I'll get an angry letter back saying, well, we didn't want you to give a PPD rating. What did you want? That's kind of an issue. But yes, I like those letters a lot.
Will you watch the video I send with the letter?
Like the surveillance.
Surveillance.
Yeah, I love those. That's actually entertaining.
All right, I think we can go on to the third topic, which is pre-existing conditions.
The guy called me up at home and said, "You've been hit in the head with a chairlift." I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "That makes you a moron." We consider that a pre-existing condition.
There's a long list of pre-existing conditions that can cause someone to be denied coverage. For example, is this one weak handshake? That one, yeah. Having a case of the Mondays, not
flesh-eating bacteria. Hot dog fingers. Government-created killer nanorobot infection.
So on this next topic, in the workers' comp system, we can suspend benefits when you return someone to their pre-injury state of health. How many out there have addressed that issue with the doctor? All right. So
How many of you have gotten the answer that you were looking for, the satisfactory answer?
How many of you had to clarify or follow up or try to talk them into actually answering that question? I can imagine from the doctor's perspective that's got to be difficult because if you have someone in there that has been working and they have an injury and then they're out and they're treating and you're saying that they're back to their pre-injury state, they're going to be telling the doctor that they're not and that they're not back to work yet, so obviously they're not back to being as good. So I guess my first question is, I'd like to hear from everybody here, what is it that you look at if you're going to answer that question? What would you like to see? Is it people rating their pain scales? Are there certain tests or objective tests that you can compare? But how do we help you make the medical call on someone being back to their pre-injury state of health?
Well, it's great when you guys can discover prior medical records before an injury of someone with back pain, for example. So they were treated in 2004 and then again in 2006 and 2008 for same kind of disc issues or back injury, and then they got injured again in 2012. That's very helpful to me because I can see that they've got a history of non-related, non-injury at work related to back pain issues. So I can answer that question better. Obviously, when somebody comes in, they got the films or the report, and it just shows sort of degenerative arthritic conditions, and they were injured on the job 2 months ago. Well, that's not a work injury. You may have a little bit of an aggravation of a pre-existing arthritic condition. So that's injured. That's easy to answer that. When somebody comes in and they're fairly young and they had a pretty decent fall injury or something and they have a disc bulge at L4 or 5 and they've never had any history of any back pain before, and they say, okay, what is this pre-existing condition? Well, I don't know how long that bulge has been there. It could have been there from the injury. It could have been there 5 years from the injury. People all the time can have disc bulges in their spine, but nobody just takes random MRIs to look at it. So that's very hard. And I will tell you that if the injury has been present for 25 years and they're sending me the IME and say, is this pre-existing? I have no way to answer that question. I do not know. Because I didn't know the person 25 years ago.
I think for me, a lot of the heavy lifting is done on the first part of the examination. So I mostly see this as a manifestation of people with knee arthritis who twist their knee and now they hurt. And so you want to find out what they were able to do before that, try to, as best you can, delineate their functional level. And then you set expectations at the very first visit. You say, listen, we're going to try to get you better, but you will never be perfect. You have arthritis. Only Jesus can make that go away without a knee replacement. And so you have to set the expectations. If they start to think, well, I had some aching and now it twisted and now it's really bad, but I really want it to go away, it's not going to go away completely. And they need to know that out of the gate.
Yeah, I think it's a similar boat. Most of what I see with pre-existing is knee or ankle arthritis with a superimposed injury that was mildly traumatic and has exacerbated it. And so expectation setting and then just differentiating that the knee pain you had before is not part of this, so no, your total knee can't be the workers' comp claim is part of that.
Yeah, I mean, just echoing what was been said already. One trick I have found is a lot of people will say for spine that they haven't seen a spine doctor, and I'll kind of investigate more, and I'll usually discover there's a chiropractic treatment or something that's kind of off the books that maybe is a little harder to find. That obviously can count as some kind of previous treatment, but certainly anytime we can document previous low back treatment, trips to the ER, certainly discover some late trips, some stuff like that that's further down in treatment that this person was having a problem before.
So doctors, one of the things that we obviously like to use are MRIs, and if we have got previous MRIs, I think we've been told that certainly is helpful to do a comparison. I have been getting a lot of requests from clients lately about MRIs and aging the MRIs. Can you, do any of you have experience with those? Are those valid? Are they useful? Can MRIs accurately be aged to give you a time and point when the injury manifested?
For spine, for an MRI, looking at the age of a herniated disc, it can be done if you see certain characteristics, but it's very difficult. I think it's fraught with complications, really age out a herniation. Obviously, some degenerative discs, you can look for some different things, but I think mostly they're looking at an acute herniation. So how old is the disc?
So it's not like rings on a tree,
It
count
can,
the years.
if you see it, you can look for, you think you look for edema, you look for certain kinds of swelling. Most of them you're not going to see that, and it's going to be very hard to age.
But for any of the other doctors, for other body parts.
I think it's similar with the foot and ankle, that if it's a very acute injury, you see edema associated with things, and if it's a very old injury, a tendinosis or something like that, it's very easy to pick out, but kind of the intermediate range would be hard to accurately predict.
It's a little different for shoulder rotator cuff tears. You can age them pretty easily. I trained in Switzerland, and my boss over there was one of the people that pioneered this. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but if you tear your rotator cuff and it retracts, your body is brilliant, and it takes a lot of energy to keep a muscle ready to fire at a moment's notice. And so that muscle, if it's not doing its job, your body says, well, I'm going to do something different with this. I'm going to convert it to fat. I'm going to turn this muscle that was helpful but is no longer helpful into fat, and it's what's called fatty degeneration. There's a grade of that. So if a rotator cuff is over 6 months old, it will start that degenerative process. If they say I fell 2 weeks ago and you get an MRI and the cuff is all fat, they may have fallen, but they certainly didn't tear the cuff at that time.
Are there any questions that we have before we go on? All right. On this next question, so in Georgia, an aggravation to a pre-existing condition is accepted as a new injury. So if someone comes in and they aggravate a pre-existing condition, we have to treat that until we get them back to their pre-injury state. My concern has always been, what exactly is an aggravation? And when I say that, I mean, I could have a back injury at home and be in a lot of back pain. Going into the office and sitting at my desk all day, it's going to aggravate my back because I'm sitting there, but is that really an injury? So how do we get you to say that this really isn't an injury? This is aggravating, let's say, symptoms versus a physical condition, but I think you see a lot of very subtle aggravations that are raised, and they try to file new claims even though they've got a pre-existing condition that may be completely unrelated. How can we ask that question in the right phrase, use the right phrases to get you to understand that's what we're talking about? Dr. Brooks, if you want to start down there since you were last one.
I mean, certainly the aggravation of a pre-existing condition is the toughest question. I think there has to be an injury. Like, you can't say, I was sitting at my desk and my back started hurting. There has to be. Typically, we'll look for something. Was there a witnessed injury? Was there some real mechanism? And then once again, just really taking a good history and looking for it. If the employer will contact me beforehand, or since sometimes we're worried about this mechanism, this doesn't, or where this patient may have had it before, it really does tip me off, because a lot of times, like I said, the nurse case manager is not there, and it's just the two of us in this room. It's just one-on-one, and they're telling me about this traumatic, huge event that occurred, and I don't have a video a lot of times, and I've just got to take it from the patient. So, I think the communication you go back to, give me as much information up front in that first visit so I know what I'm looking for. If you're worried about the injury, or you're worried about the employee, it really does help out.
And I think one of the hard parts is establishing what was their pre-existing functional level and what was their pre-existing condition, because unless you have prior documentation of said body part, it's hard really to establish what their prior level of pain and symptoms were. And then again, a lot of times with the mercy is what they tell you as far as their injury. So I think it becomes it's a hard thing to know.
It is a challenge. I agree with Dr. Brooks. You need to have an injury. If you have knee arthritis and it just develops in the course of your day at work, that is not an exacerbation. That's just a manifestation of your knee arthritis. So if they have slipped on some coffee on the ground and they land directly on the knee, that is an aggravation of pre-existing arthritis, but it just doesn't evolve. If they can't give me a date, like, I think it happened, sometime in May. That's not an aggravation in my mind.
Dr. Pennington, before we move on, I actually have a case where I have a cashier that's working at a department store, and they took away the mat that she was standing on. So then she was standing on some concrete floor, and she said it aggravated her knees, and she files a claim. So does that, should we ask you, is that an aggravation, like a physical aggravation, or is that just an aggravating symptom that she should experience whether she's at home or not at home, which in our opinion is idiopathic as opposed to a real injury?
So if she walked on mats all day in every location, then that could be an exacerbation. But if she's walking and she's not on mats when she goes to the grocery store, then in my mind that is not an exacerbation.
She wore those expensive sandals that have the mat base. Dr. Mefford, what's your thoughts? Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I agree with everything they said. You know, it's when you do work comp and non-work comp, of course, somebody comes in, a Medicare patient where they got, degenerative spine from arthritis, they get exacerbations of pain all the time, right? They're doing well for a while, and then they do something in the backyard, and they don't really have an injury, but now they got a little bit of back pain because they mowed the lawn when they usually don't do it. So it's simple. You treat them with, a couple, NSAIDs, or you do a facet injection, and they're on their way, and they're happy. And the only thing, the reason why this is different on work comp is it's work comp, and everything's more difficult, right? Complicated. So, when people come in and it's an exacerbation of pre-existing condition, I'm going to treat it the same way. We're going to do a couple little quick things, try to get you tuned back in shape, and if I can't identify there's a new injury of some kind, then you move on and you're done. That's how I look at it.
Are there any questions? So I think we're on to our last topic, which is...
Got a question.
It's inevitable with workers' comp. You have a 60-year-old guy. He's got a degenerative spine. Well, my back never hurt before. I don't care how much degeneration is. But it's chronic. I mean,
Educating the patient. The tough one is a 60-year-old heavy laborer, and you're right, that's a tough patient. That's one that needs education and to work through. But that could be a really tough patient for sure.
And again, is that something where you're looking more towards, was there something they were actually doing when they experienced the pain, as opposed to this person was going to have pain in their back eventually? They've had a heavy labor job their entire life, and whether it's at 60, 65, it just happens to be a coincidence they're at work at the time.
Yeah, you've got to educate them that this is just, right, they've got to degenerate this and work really unrelated, unless there's some major injury that changed or something like that, but usually there's not.
Any other questions? All right, our last topic is drug-seeking behavior and opioid abuse.
Hello. Dr. Fry, pleased to meet you. Hey, Doc. Good to meet you. Highly recommended. So, been having headaches? Yes. Got some problems with your equilibrium? Oh, come up in the shit all day. Okay, so I'll hold you for a month. Now come back and see me. Thank you. It's a short-term thing.
We started off this seminar with Chairman McKay talking about the opioid problems in Georgia and throughout the country. And so we really wanted to kind of illustrate that more and get feedback from the experts who see this on the ground all the time. And we see it in reports. Those of us in the workers' comp system, we know what we think is painkiller abuse and opioid abuse, and I know a lot of times we loosely can throw out that doctors are contributing to this, and don't get me wrong, I think that there certainly are a lot of doctors who are contributing to this problem. Fortunately, none of the doctors on our panel, and I think that they're all actively trying to help us in this battle. one thing to remember is that the state board is on our side, on your side, frankly, on the side of the patients, the injured workers. They realize that the detriments to the physical health, aside from the injury, is overwhelming with this opioid crisis, and they are actively trying to figure out ways around this, figure out other methods to better control pain without having the same addiction problems. And so I want to obviously start off with Dr. Mefford, because I'm sure he deals with this on a day-to-day basis much more than any of us. Dr. Mefford, what is it you're seeing? What kinds of trends, and how are you working to kind of combat this crisis?
Well, the opioid crisis is in the news every day, basically, some way or another. You're hearing about it. In West Virginia, you've got mass casualty situations where several hundred people each week are coming into ERs, with heroin overdoses and of course accidental overdoses and intentional overdoses, and you got drugs laced with fentanyl. When why would you lace heroin with fentanyl? The rate of approach is amazing to me. Now you have a drug out there that's scary called Gray Death. It's fentanyl, fentanyl, and heroin, and some other designer type of drug, and they say even being in the same room, if it aerosolizes, can kill you. If I were a drug dealer, I wouldn't be a very good one if I was killing my clientele. I don't really understand that. So you see these problems a lot. And Dr. Porter and myself in Marietta, we don't get a lot of heroin up there. Occasionally somebody will come back with a methamphetamine. And maybe we don't advertise to the patient population. So we tend to have a fairly responsible patient load, if that makes sense, as far as people on high-dose opioids. There are some physicians who clearly have gotten some heat on them because they're closing down the pain aspect of their practices, and we're starting to see them want to come over to our practice. We actually had to put a stop to them because we were seeing the Trinity, the famous Trinity, which is the benzodiazepine like Xanax, Soma, and then the opioid. And the Trinity is what the DEA would utilize to close down pill mills that you saw the signs on the side of the road about 5 or 6 years ago. And all those pill mills came out of Florida back during the mid-2000s when the housing market crashed, and these two brothers got together and they came up with this scheme of these pill mills. And they at the point when they were closed down, they had something like 27 clinics in the Fort Lauderdale area. They were taking cash and they were burning $1 bills out in 50-gallon drums because they didn't want that much cash to deposit in the bank, because if you deposit more than $10,000 per turn in the bank says, what are you doing, right? So they had all this money and this cash, and when they raided these guys, they had 14 safes in their grandmother's attic, all stashed with $1 million cash each. So that's where this started, and that map is a perfect example. It came out of Florida, moved up into Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, and out, and it went straight up into New York, where these people would come down and do all these things. So that, thank God, has gotten better, but the issue we see now are people on huge doses of opioids. And some of them are quite functional, some of them are on it because it used to be not that long ago we thought that opioids, there was no ceiling effect. If you go up and up and up, and either you got side effects that you had to back down on, or they just got pain relief. We found out that's not true, and so now, I'm sure you'll talk about here in a minute, the CDC guidelines and all these things that are happening now that are trying to curtail the opioid epidemic. I will tell you, though, with what you're seeing with it harder to get prescription drugs, it is now easier to get heroin on the street. A little dime bag of heroin, they call it a $10 bag of heroin, very easy to get on the street. Why? Because we've had open borders for the last 30 years. And so you have a ton of heroin coming across the borders unchecked, and so that's easier to get now than it is to get prescription drugs. It's a serious problem.
So, in your practice, when you have a patient come in who is clearly opioid dependent, who has a legitimate injury, but has become opioid dependent and it's a problem and there are addiction issues, what are your strategies to combat that and reduce that problem?
We see this a lot, obviously in the work comp area, arena. When we like to see patients early in the process to prevent them from getting to this point, but we will often get a patient who's 5 or 6 years into the injury, a back injury, or even maybe had a back fusion, and they're now on high-dose opioids, and the orthopedic surgeon sort of tired of dealing with them and says, go see pain management. You're not at the point where you need to see pain management because I can't write your OxyContin anymore, I can't write your high-dose morphine or whatever. And so it's always a difficult conversation, but actually thank goodness for the CDC guidelines, because it actually gives me a real tool to say, look, you're well over the 90 milliequivalents of morphine per day. I have no choice but to reduce you. Well, they don't like that very much. And so we would do injection therapy. We've got other medications that are non-opioids, addicting types of medications we can try. There's things like cognitive behavioral therapy that's starting to catch on to be actually a pretty good way to to do this. There's physical therapies and certain types of things like that we try.
For the orthopedics, when you are treating a verifiable objective injury, a rotator cuff tear, a herniated disc, even fractures in ankle or foot, and at what point do you make a determination that you think that opiates are a reasonable and necessary treatment? Dr. Pennington?
It's clinical. It depends on how bad an injury they had and how far post-surgery they are. I don't want to really get into this, but last year I went through the police academy, and I'm actually an Alpharetta police officer also. And so I've had the misfortune of going to see either suicides or overdoses, and to actually see the dead person has really changed the way I prescribe medications. And so I'm incredibly stingy now. And you need to really be hurting, and you get enough to get you to that point. So it's hard to get a refill for me after some of those experiences.
Dr. Heisch?
I think one thing that's definitely helped me out is the Georgia going to an opioid registry, because I was pretty, especially for post-surgery and acute injuries, I would give people pain medicine. I've gotten much more stingy, and I think the AOFS did a good study that most foot and ankle surgeons don't prescribe opioids for and even post-op, so I've become even more stingy. But I had a couple patients who were going to different orthopedists with the same injury, getting multiple prescriptions filled, and having that registry has been valuable to the health curve who I prescribe to.
I can't agree with all of it, but somebody said about the state laws. I mean, I use that a lot. I simply tell my patients, see, the law will only allow me to do this and this. I don't really give hardly anyone narcotic who's not like a acute post-op patient. Usually we can get them with non-addictive, steroids injections. But it's been great to have these laws that say, listen, we can't give it. Now even most of the commercial insurances will limit what you can give a number about, and that's been great. That way, when they want more, I say we can, and you kind of are putting them off onto I say it's the federal law or state law, and it kind of they say, oh, okay, and they understand that. But also have a relationship with I do work with pain doctors that will help you out if somebody is addicted to help try to decrease what they're using.
Dr. Mefford, are there specific drug testing requirements that Georgia has set forth that you have to undergo or that your patients have to undergo to continue to receive any amounts of opioids?
There are. In Georgia, the state board says now that you have to do a urine drug screen initial visit if somebody's going to be on a chronic opioid. I think it's more than 3 days now. You have to start doing a urine drug screen initial visit, and then at least every 90 days. And then there's going to be they want you to come and have them come in for a random. So technically that's 5 urine drug screens per year the state of Georgia wants you to do. You do see some doctors who do these things every 27 days to a month, which is not what the state of Georgia wants you to do, or is recommending you do. Some do that, we don't, but it's at least every 90 days. And then of course the PDMP, the database, the Georgia database that they were talking about, which lists all the different controlled substances. So by law, as of January 1st this year, we have to check that for anybody who's getting a medication for more than 3 days. And we do. Every 90 days when the patient comes in, we check the database and make sure they're not getting meds from another place. The state actually knows if you're checking it because it's registering your ID. You have to actually sign up for the site, register it. So they do it that way. Of course, you get phone calls from pharmacies and things like that all the time as well, because that's the first thing they do when they're filling opioids. They check the registry themselves. So now there's starting to be a lot of checks and balances in that regard, and it is definitely helpful.
Does every doctor have to check the registry?
Yes.
So the question was, does every doctor have to check the registry that Dr. Mefford was just talking about?
If you're prescribing for more than 3 days, then yes, you have to check the registry.
The question is, do emergency rooms?
Usually emergency rooms, I think now, are not prescribing more than 3 days. If they are, then they might. I don't know the answer to that one.
So, yeah, that may be also an issue. A lot of times we try to encourage our clients to talk with the medical professionals that they're going to use or that are around their facilities. It's a little harder when you're dealing with a hospital emergency room, but kind of finding out what their protocols are with regard to pain management or prescription of opioid medications. The more communication we were talking about earlier, the better.
The drug testing, is that only by pain management doctors?
You're talking about the urine drug screens? So the question is are the urine drug screens only by pain management doctors?
No, anyone who's required, who's writing prescriptions has to order the drug, urine drug test.
My question is, what are y'all's thoughts on the use of medicinal marijuana as opposed to opiates as a way to curb the
Can you start the question over just with the?
what are y'all's thoughts on the use of medicinal marijuana as opposed to using opiates for the treatment of pain management?
Dr. Mefford, do you want to take the lead?
So in the state of Georgia, they actually passed, I think, 9 more additional things. So there's, I think, what are we up to? About 20 different things that you can get medicinal marijuana for. The studies are mixed. There's studies that say there's some benefit. There's studies that say there's no benefit whatsoever. In Georgia, they're allowing up to 5% CBD oil, cannabinoid oil, for treatment of things like chronic pain. We don't know yet. In Georgia, there's no way really to get it. And I don't know what the licensure is for a physician to prescribe it. We haven't been told that either. I haven't been asked to write a prescription. I wouldn't know how to do it. I wouldn't know if I was even qualified to do it because there's probably some sort of training process you have to go to. Now, if somebody wants to use CBD oil in place of opioids, that's probably not as dangerous as somebody overdosing on oxycodone. How many times do you hear people overdosing on marijuana? The question is, I don't know how effective it is. You see a lot of pro athletes saying, football players, for example, I want to use CBD oil instead of going home and taking opioids. How many are going home and using opioids? Probably not. They probably want some other joints when they go out, playing ball or something like that. But I don't have enough personal experience with it to know if it helps or if it isn't. I have anecdotal at best.
So Dr. Mefford, if you do the urine drug screen, this will actually go for anybody, and they do test positive for cannabinoids. How does that impact what you are or are not able to prescribe to them from an opiate standpoint?
This is starting to get murky now that Georgia has passed this cannabinoid up to 5%, which will trigger THC on your urine drug screen. You can get some of this CBD oil that is non-THC over the counter, the GNCs and places like that. That should not trigger THC. The state of Georgia says that if people have illegal drugs in their system, it is against conduct of professionalism to continue to prescribe narcotics. So if they come back with THC, cocaine, methamphetamines, I have to address it and say I'm not going to give it to you. So now it gets murky with this medicinal marijuana that's kind of lingering around. If they can't get it in Georgia, but they say they go out to Colorado and bring back a pack of gummies, well, now they're trafficking across state lines, and that's another issue. But if I have had a couple of patients who had a legitimate prescription from some doctor saying that they are on medicinal marijuana. There's not a whole lot I can do if they have a prescription for it at this point that I'm aware of. The rules are a little murky on it.
Any other doctors have anything you want to add?
I have not had any experience writing. My dad's a family medicine doctor. He's been doing family medicine for 50 years in a fairly underserved area, and he has had a little bit of experience and has had some really positive results with it. I think it's probably going to be expanded in the coming years, and I think it would. I think it will, as a personal opinion, I think it will greatly decrease our opioid usage. I hope it does.
And lastly, we want to touch on identification of these issues, kind of along the lines of symptom magnification and malingering. Do you have specific tests or protocols that you use to try to determine if someone is drug seeking or if they have addiction issues, other than bags of Cheetos in their pockets?
Oh, well, with me, just our practices, we're kind of set up where staff are pretty good about, fielding the phone calls when people are in, they're wanting their meds a week or two early, or their meds aren't strong enough. Every time they come in, they want stronger and stronger meds.
Or they lost them?
Or they lost them.
Flushed them down the toilet?
Well, we have a policy. We don't, we have people who claim they go and fill their oxycodone at Walmart. They sit in the buggy and they turn around to get the shampoo off the shelf and they turn around, it's gone. Sorry, you're out from another month. There's nothing we do about it. Even when they say, well, I have a police report, we don't even film the police reports. Anybody can get a police report saying anything. So we're actually pretty strict. It's true. We're pretty strict. You'd be amazed how many people want me to write them out of jury duty, by the way. I don't write people out of jury duty, which, anyway, that's sorry, that's a side. Nobody's writing me out of jury duty. Anyway, so when people come in, we don't give them extra meds, sorry, you gotta stay within the guidelines. And it's gotten easier with the CDC. It's gotten easier with the insurance companies really cracking down on the 30-day rule. You know, even if I say it's okay, doesn't mean the insurance is going to say it's okay. Doesn't mean the pharmacist is going to say it's okay to early refill.
Any of the doctors have anything they want to add to that?
I heard Dr. Medford had a patient where they claimed that the dog ate the medication, and he actually had them bring the dog in and get drug tested.
Is that be a reporter? I think that might be a reporter. I did have a lady scoop up her pulverized medication where she put the bag on her car and then forgot about it and drove off and crunched it with her thing. I don't know what it was. I didn't give her more medication.
My question is regarding non-opiate drugs. I read an article that gabapentin is being used by the prison population to extend the euphoria of heroin. So they're mixing the two drugs. So is that something that's going to be...
Gabapentin got put on the controlled, and not because of that, but because it causes sedation. There was a study out of Canada, and any study that comes out of Canada, you got to be a little worried about. Basically, what they were looking at is they were looking at people who had overdosed and died, and the multitude of different drugs they had in their system. Gabapentin was a common one in. Well, that makes sense because gabapentin is a common drug that we prescribe for a lot of people because a lot of times they have sciatic or nerve-related pain as part of their pain complaint. And gabapentin, which is an old anticonvulsant old seizure drug, is actually not great at seizures, but it's actually pretty good with nerve-related pain. So that's a common thing. So you're going to see that a lot. So that's sort of guilt by association. What the hell else aren't they mixing with heroin? I mean, everything's getting mixed with heroin. So I've never had anybody take gabapentin to me and describe it as euphoric. People don't like it because they take it and they think they feel like a zombie. They feel stupid. They feel sedated. Most people don't like the side effects of gabapentin. So I don't know where they're going with that. Like I said, the FDA decided to make it controlled or are going to make it controlled if they haven't yet because it can make you sedated. Well, so does Benadryl, and you can get that down off the end of the counter. So there's some things that they do it's a little different.
Anybody else? All right, well, thank you all very much, and please help me thank our panelists. We do